My name is Maya and I am 28. I grew up with this family because for as long as I can remember they told me they had chosen me, saved me, given me a home. They were right, they took me in when I was 5. But they never told me the cost attached to that kindness. The birthday dinner for my mother Linda was supposed to be small. Immediate family, one private room at Le Marquis, a cake, polite toasts. Instead it was a performance. Caviar passed like props, expensive wine poured with theatrical care, and Claire, my elder sister, narrating family anecdotes with an audience's glee. Ethan, my brother, who usually hid behind a poker face, was louder than usual. I tried to let the evening wash over me. I had rehearsed smiling and nodding for years. Then, as the server collected plates, Ethan leaned across and said without even a whisper, "You don't belong here, Maya. This is our night." The room froze just long enough for a few other tables to glance over. Laughter bubbled from someplace behind Claire as if he'd told a joke. My mother patted his hand like she was proud of him. I wanted to shrink into my chair. When the check arrived, it landed in front of me like an accusation. "We decided you should cover tonight," Claire announced, grinning like she'd pulled a prank. "You're always talking about your freelance success. Consider this your contribution." The bill read $3,100. Premium bottles, multiple courses, a shared dessert platter I hadn't even liked. The word contribution felt like a punch. I had been working 2 jobs and saving for a studio space. Every cent carefully counted. I'd recently landed a small contract that would pay in pieces over months. It was not money to be spent on a family theater meant to humiliate me. I felt the old habit of swallowing rise up, that mechanical obedience that had kept me fed and sheltered as a child. But something else shifted that night, not courage so much as refusal. I paid. I signed the receipt with trembling fingers and left with my head held higher than I felt. I took a cab home and cried in the dark of my apartment, each tear rough with humiliation and a strange ember of anger. The next morning my phone exploded. "You're being dramatic," my mother texted. "Family jokes. Get over it." Claire sent a stream of emojis. Crying laugh, heart, wink. Ethan texted later, "You should show some spine. Stop acting like a victim." The messages piled like small stones, each one a reminder that words could be weapons. I tried to move on. But the receipt, crumpled in the pocket of my coat, was like a splinter. When a curious thing happened 2 weeks later, everything accelerated. My grandmother, Evelyn, who lived quietly across town and had always had a soft spot for me, called one evening with a voice that made my stomach drop. "Maya," she said, "come see me. Bring nothing. Just you." Grandma Evelyn had never been wealthy in the gossipy sense, but she had a quiet order in her affairs. A trust fund, a small real estate portfolio, investments she managed with careful competence. She was also the only person in the family who had ever spoken up for me, who took me to piano recitals, who remembered my birthdays even when my parents forgot. I thought I was going to her to vent. I didn't expect a folder of bank statements and a tremor in her hands. She told me that when I'd been adopted there had been a trust set up by my birth parents' estate, intended for my upbringing, education, and care. She slid the papers toward me. The numbers were impossible and familiar in that way numbers are when you've been counting pennies your whole life. $420,000 transferred to my adoptive parents' accounts in the months after the adoption. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice paper thin. Evelyn's eyes filled with something fierce. "They spent most of it," she said. Evidence followed. Withdrawal slips, credit card statements showing vacations and private school tuition for Claire, luxury purchases, payments to a mortgage unrelated to any house I'd ever known. The money had disappeared into the family's lifestyle, not into mine. The betrayal cut deeper than the restaurant humiliation. It became not only emotional abuse but theft with a ledger. I had been raised on hand-me-downs and scholarships while my siblings enjoyed enrollments, tutors, and a childhood that looked like a glossy catalog. The trust had been meant for me. I had been fed on lies. Evelyn explained that she had been gathering proof quietly for months. She'd hired an accountant, compiled statements, spoken to lawyers. "They'll fight," she warned. "They will say I'm mistaken. They will say you manipulated me." Her voice hardened. "We have to be prepared." We were prepared, faster than I could have expected. The confrontation with the family came sooner than a court date. Evelyn, with a careful plan, called a family dinner, the kind they'd always thrown, brittle with expectations, and made a quiet announcement at the end of the night. She revealed a revised will. The room did not just go quiet. It stalled as if the air had been stopped. "I cannot in good conscience leave what I have to people who will take advantage of me and of others," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "Maya, you will be my executor and primary beneficiary." There was shouting. Claire stormed. Ethan went pale. My mother's face went from surprise to furious bargaining in seconds. I sat unmoving, as if watching someone else watching a movie about my life. They accused Evelyn of being manipulated, of failing mind, of impulsiveness. My family's outrage and entitlement had no filter. But Evelyn had been meticulous. She had medical evaluations, witness statements from neighbors and friends, documentation of the trust, and the bank records linking the missing funds to expenses that had nothing to do with my care. She had made a choice. The legal fight started and the media noticed. Not initially, but once Claire made a public statement accusing me of ambition masking as entitlement, a local reporter smelled a story. The narrative exploded, fractured, and then settled in a way I didn't expect. As the recordings of Claire and Ethan's private outbursts leaked, courtesy of a disgruntled family friend, public sympathy shifted. People tend to side with the person who looks wronged by a family of privilege. People like an underdog who has kept their dignity. Court days were long. There were motions, depositions, insinuations hurled at me as if 28 years of silence were suddenly proof of manipulative intent. My work records, bank statements, even childhood photos were scrutinized. Lawyers probed the timeline of payments and asked pointed questions about my relationship with Evelyn. But the records were blunt. The trust had been real, the transfers had been made, and the expenditures were not in my name. Claire, in a press conference intended to garner sympathy, admitted on camera that her parents had used trust funds to pay for private schooling and renovations. The clip went viral in hours. When the judge ruled in our favor, the relief was not immediate. There was a hollow in my chest, as if the fight had been for something too large to fit inside me. Evelyn, frail but resolute, squeezed my hand outside the courtroom and said, "You don't owe them anything. Build something they never could." We did more than seize what was rightfully mine. Evelyn insisted we create a foundation in her mother's name, the Evelyn Grant Fund, to support children who were adopted into homes where money or affection had been withheld, to provide emergency legal help, education grants, and mentorship. I learned about trusteeship, governance, nonprofit filings, and how to hire people smarter than me. I invested in a small creative studio for my freelance business. I smiled in public interviews until people started to use my first name as shorthand for resilience. My parents were ordered to return the trust funds with interest. They declared bankruptcy, moved to a smaller town, and for the first time tasted instability. Claire's marriage dissolved as debts mounted, and Ethan lost his job after his personal finances were audited amid the controversy. They reached out to me sometimes, soft, pleading messages that smelled of old privilege, but I had new boundaries. I donated a sum equal to the original trust, not as forgiveness, but as a fund named for the childhood dollars they diverted, to pay for scholarships for other kids like me. The months after Evelyn's death, which came peacefully a few years later with me by her side, were punctuated by both grief and purpose. I sat at her bedside and promised to run the foundation with the fierce attention she taught me. The work became my anchor. Each child we helped felt like reclaiming a small piece of the childhood I'd been denied. Tonight, when I walk past Le Marquise, I remember Ethan's voice, the hush, the bill. I remember the way my hands shook as I signed away that humiliation. But I also remember the small paper folder of bank statements sliding across a mahogany desk in my grandmother's sunlit study. I remember the courtroom's hush and finally, the judge's words that confirmed what I already knew, that belonging is not a thing you inherit by blood alone. It's something you earn with decency, with courage, and sometimes, painfully, by insisting on the truth. I am not the sum of that $3,100 bill. I am the foundation I helped build from it, the studio where other artists now find space to grow, the scholarships that sent 4 adopted teens to college this year. I am Maya. Paid a humiliating bill once and used that moment to buy a future for hundreds.